Greetings and felicitations, children of technology. Welcome back to my yearly video on best metal albums or some metal albums of the year 2025. Before I would start, I would like to make an overall reflection on the year. To be honest, I don't think that this was a good year, not even in a personal level, but also for metal in general. Especially if we compare to the previous years. The previous years there were some releases that were pivotal to the metal scene and how it somehow evolved and developed to the current days, but I have the tendency to think that this year was more of the same, although some very good albums, although some things that can be qualified as innovative, but overall as a year I don't think it was as prolific as especially last year. I'll show only the ones that I've got here, which are not many, and then I'll finalize with my top 10 of the year as usual. Some of the records I couldn't get it yet, and might be for logistical reasons, such as not being released yet, or not being pressed yet, or not available here in Europe, or some are still going to be released. I know that December is a quiet month in terms of releases, although I know that there is a band that I already gave a shout out here in the previous years called Túmulo. They're gonna release their first album on the 15th of December this year. So a follow-up to their demo, Cristo Demente. This one is called O Evangelho do Canhoto, and it's gonna be released by a Portuguese label. If I'm not wrong, it's called Caverna Abismal. And yeah, so I couldn't show it up. And I also wanted to show you the new vinyl, the new record of Outlaw, but Daniel is, I don't know what he's up to. I just know that he went to Brazil, and because of that reason everyone's got the record but me. So yeah, but I will link here at least the clip that we did for a track of the new album. Yeah, watch it afterwards. It was done in a very primitive way, almost no budget at all, but I think that the outcome came up in a positive way. And yeah, and I will also link in the card by the end of the video a video of us playing live a new track also from this album in Partizan this year. But anyways, if you're interested in getting the record, you can check also not only at Outlaw's Bandcamp but also on AOP website. So without further ado, let's start with records of this year. Here are some that I got and I would like to make some comments about, not related to the best ones of the year. So the first one is a quite unusual record for the standards of what I tend to listen to. But anyways, my musical taste is quite broad in a sense. And this one is a reflex of that. This was released by 20 Buck Spin, which is a label that I spoke about many times here before. But this is not a metal record, so to speak. This is the self-titled debut album by Bleed, which is an American alternative metal band. But I say when it's not a metal band and then I say it's alternative metal, but so to speak, not the kind of music that I consider to be metal. This will be good for enjoyers of nostalgia from the late 90s and early 2000s, for those who play Tony Hawk, Pro Skaters, those who like Deftones. This is not as good as their EP that came out like 2 to 3 years ago, but it is good. I think it's quite enjoyable. And yeah, since it has nothing to do with most of the things that I show up here, I thought that showing this record here might be a good addition to this video. So moving forward, starting from this one, was quite hyped. Aufski Felleskov, forgive me my lack of knowledge in Nordic languages. And Aufski's been quite on spot on the recent black metal contemporary scene. This is the first album fully released by Eisenwald before he departed from Vendetta. And yeah, Aufski's been on tour recently. And to be honest, I don't think this album is as good as the ones that came before. Especially the second one, which was the album that brought some visibility to Aufski in a worldwide recognition. If, as I said, I'm not an expert in Nordic languages, but I think it translates to sometimes I dream I was dead, ofta jag drömmer mig död, something like that. Anyways, but the presentation of this record is absolutely beautiful. This is a red one. I could have bought the version that was special for the tour because I saw them live here in Hanover as well. But I already had bought it beforehand, so I did a pre-order of this one. I would say that I was slightly disappointed, but anyways, it's more of the same. So if you know what to expect from Aufski, this record will not disappoint you, but don't expect anything new from it as well. Moving forward, so I'll leave this for last. Another band that is also not within my musical range, or although I like this band, but it is not like the others, and I know that a lot of people twist their mind when think about this band. But I'm talking about the new Deafheaven album, Lonely People with Power. This album is so far the best Deafheaven release, according to my opinion. I think that they managed to mix the best of what they had before and add a new touch. Their previous album was not a metal album by any means, it was more like a shoegaze album that I really enjoyed, to be honest. But I think that here they combine the best of their black metal approach to this shoegazy dream pop version like, and I think they reached something new in here. This is probably a future classic of the current days metal, although I know that people that are into black metal are usually not into Deafheaven because, I don't know, they're seen as posers, they're seen as hipsters or whatever. But for you that don't care about what happens outside of the music aspect of a band, this one is a great release for the year, and I was positively impressed with that one. So moving forward, let me check another one. Oh, another band, German band, classic one. They came back with their full lineup, or at least most of their original members together, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, in which they released a self-titled album. But right now I'm talking about the new album by the big lineup of Helloween. This one is Giants and Monsters, and it follows more or less the same approach that they had on the previous album. So some epic tracks, some happy metal tracks as well, but mostly good power speed metal, as they've always been in the last 40 years. I'm a big fan of Helloween. Helloween was probably one of the first bands that I was really deep into, and although this does not compare to their classics, I think most of the songs here are very catchy, and I would say that Giants on the Run, which is the opening track of this, is probably my favorite track of the year. It's the chorus sticks in your ear like a massive earworm, and yeah, I'm a big fan of Helloween, and I think that for a band that is on the road for so long like Helloween, they managed to reinvent themselves and come up with something very unique, special for their fans. And yeah, Giants and Monsters, big one. Moving forward, here we go. Let's see what I've got here. So this one almost could be in my top 10. This is part of my Brazilian call here. I already spoke about Túmulo, which is a band from Switzerland, although they sing in Brazilian Portuguese with Portuguese lyrics and a Brazilian metal approach to their first wave of black metal sound. This one goes more or less on the same hand, so for fans of Venom, this is probably the best Venom release in let's say 30 years since Possessed. Anyways, Whip Striker, Cry of Extinction. So Whip Striker is the one-man band of Victor Whip Striker from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. But I think that this album he didn't record on his own, so maybe it was the first record that he actually had a band. As I said, there's nothing much more to be said for those that like old school black death speed thrash metal, some punk attitude, even some doomish at some part. This is a great album. As I said, fans of Venom should check this out, and Whip Striker was recently in tour here in Germany or in Europe as a whole with another Brazilian band that plays more or less in the same vein, Apocalyptic Raids. So fans of Hellhammer, Bathory, and the entire first wave of black metal, or whatever, call it the way you want. Some people don't consider it to be black metal, some other people consider it to be the only true form of black metal acceptable. Whip Striker, great call. Since I mentioned Brazilian black metal, there's a new CD that from a Brazilian band, also from some veteran dude that started a recent band. I spoke about them in a video maybe from 2 years, 3 years ago, which is Voltham, The Tyrant Tale. And this one was not released on vinyl yet, although their first album that was also not released on vinyl found this year a vinyl press. This was released through Drakkar in France, I guess, because there's also like a South American Drakkar, but I don't know if they have a differentiation between where do they press and where do they distribute it. So yeah, Drakkar Productions, South American Division, drakkarbrazil.com.br. Yeah, so maybe not released in France, but definitely available in France, as I ordered mine from them directly. And this is old school second wave of black metal for those that like whatever Norway was up to until 1994. There's even a Darkthrone cover here, Skuld av Satan's Soul. Once again, forgive me for my lack of knowledge in Nordic languages. And yeah, this is a great album. I've always been a fan of the bands from most of the guys that are here involved, especially the doom metal band called Mythological Cold Towers. That's a band that from the singer and the guitar player, main composer of this band. So Voltham, if you like classic black metal, go after that one. And before I go within my top 10, this album is not exactly a new release by any means. It's actually an old release, but well, old releases. It's an old recording, only released now. So there's this album, which is a classic album of whatever, call it the way you want, gore, splatter. Although in the terms of sound, this is very much melodic death metal, I would call it, which is Impaled. So their classic album Mondo Medicale. These are the demo recordings from Mondo Medicale. So it's called Demo Medicale. And anyways, one of their main guys passed away and they found out the original recording. So this is a more crude approach, more, I don't know, raw, not very well produced as the album is. Some riffs change and differ from here and there, but the main concept of Mondo Medicale is here, which is an album that I really like. But to be honest, the demo versions, to me, sound even better. But that's because I like a more crude approach, and yeah, so this was a great release. Also, like, beautiful splatter record. This is, as I mentioned, a tribute to the memory of their immoral surgeon Andrew Labar, who passed away and who on these albums is responsible for maybe not only the guitars and vocals but also the production, if I'm not wrong. And yeah, great call. So before moving into my top 10, I would say some words about what will be my top 11, which is a demo that I couldn't get, but I think they should be mentioned, or he should be mentioned. I'm talking about the black metal musician called Taurus, or alias Taurus, and from the band, he's got plenty of bands, but I'm talking about Arbor, the demo called Erwache. And it's, man, this guy has been so active in the previous years, the recent years, not only with Arbor, but also with Gauntlet Ring and plenty of other projects of Blood and Crescent, which are almost impossible to buy because every time they release, it's already sold out. And I think the demo was limited 100 copies. And so, as I mentioned, this guy, Taurus, I don't know where he comes from originally. I know that he's American, or at least most of his bands are named as American. And he started releasing records under the alias Taurus only since the last few years, so I don't know if he's quite young. I don't know if he's an older dude that started only producing now. I have no idea where he came from. I know that he has a good hand for classic black metal, and from the releases that he put out this year, I know that there are some bands, some guys that they never stop recording, and Taurus is one of these cases. And Arbor is my call of the year. This demo Erwache is the best release that Taurus put up to date, in my opinion. And I really wanted to get the demo, but of course it was sold out, and on Discogs they're charging already like €80, which is a price I'm never gonna pay for a cassette tape. Maybe it has something to do with battery, I would do. Anyways, let's go now to my top 10 of the year. One of the albums I don't have it because, as I mentioned before, it was not officially released yet. I already did the pre-order, but I'm gonna wait, but I'm gonna talk about it quite soon. So, number 10. I spoke about Aufski, how it was a bit underwhelming. One or two of the guys from this band used to play as the live band from Aufski. So this is a Danish band called Sunken. And they released this new record, Lykke. also on Eisenwald this year. I played with the guys from Sunken few festivals together, and they were quite nice people, I would say. And I have great memories with them, both in Romania and the UK. Fortress Festival and Underground for the Masses, the first edition. Also, pretty beautiful marble, black, blue, white mix of colors. This is atmospheric black metal at its peak with some hints of depressive black metal. I would say that people that like Gris, or Gris, the Canadian band that released like some pivotal albums in the history of atmospheric depressive black metal, will definitely like this one. This is definitely a grower. There are only 4 tracks on this album. The more I listened to this album, the more I wanted to listen to it. And the first time I thought it was good, but it got better at every listen. So I would recommend you to give some time to deep dive within Sunken Cilicia. This is my number 10 of the year. Moving forward. So this is a band that I spoke so much about them before, and now they seem to finally be getting the recognition that they worked for it, because the musicianship here, it's just insane. I'm talking about the new Der Weg einer Freiheit album, Innern. They are probably one of the most well-known German black metal bands of the current days, and let's say that they have a quite modern approach to black metal, almost progressive at some points, and that, as I say, it goes hand in hand with the high skill of musicianship of especially Nikita and Tobias Schuller, the drummer. I mean, Tobias is probably the best musician on every position of the band, but he plays only the drums in this band, but he's also a very good guitar player. There's some video of him, I might link it here, that he plays like hundreds of different instruments and he fucking nails every single one. So yeah, this one, unlike the previous one, Nocturne, is, I would say that this is closer to what they did before. This is closer to Stellar and closer to Finisterre as it is from Nocturne. And I think that in this case is a good thing, because Finisterre is probably their biggest, more well-known album up to date. This cover album has a cut here, which is something that they also had on Stellar. This was released by Season of Mist. Here you got the insert. And yeah, technical, fast, sometimes sad, sometimes immersive, very energetic, sometimes full of beautiful parts, but also chaotic at some moments. Der Weg einer Freiheit is probably one of my favorite black metal contemporary bands, and I don't think they ever disappointed me up to date. But this might be their comeback to whatever I thought that was very good in them when I first heard of them around 10 years ago. And I'm glad to hear that they're getting bigger and bigger, because that might bring the possibility for them to be playing for newer audiences that will get in touch with their music, which is once again great, and they are great people too. Big shout out to Nikita. Keep up with the good job, man. Another one. So this was my top 9 of the year. Going to my top 8. So American band also came up with a hype recently, especially because all the theatrical, all of the gimmick that is also associated to them. And the first one was a bit more stonerish, although stoner is not exactly the good qualification of that, but this one is more doomish, although a bit hard rockish at some point. I'm talking about The Bestiary by Cassorette. So Cassorette became quite popular, especially due to their live presentations, in which you have all this theatrical part with some girls battling on stage and killer riffs. And yeah, this is very metal as it used to be before. You know, it has like this lo-fi approach that I like, although it's not a lo-fi band, especially for people that are into black metal. That has nothing to do with it, but it has to do with this old vibe of doom and heavy metal that the metal used to have in the 70s and especially the 80s. And their first album, Into the Realm, was already great. I think I mentioned it the year before, but this one came out even better. This one has a glitter effect in it. Not sure if the light captures the way it should be captured here, but top 8 of the year. And I would say that it started as a higher position. The thing is, I've been listening to the other records more, but I'm quite sure that if I listen to Cassorette again right now, it might fit up my top 5 once again. So don't forget to check them out in case you don't heard of them, especially live. Number 7, a band that I also spoke about on my top 5 or top 10 of some years before with their debut album, and now I'm talking about the second album, Wolves on the Trench by the Canadian band Grenadier. This one I only got in tape. Grenadier is a melodic death metal band, very much associated in terms of sound to Argos Land. So this approach of epic melodic death metal, and I would say that this one sounds to me more like Intestine Balism from Anatomy of the Beast than it used to sound from Argos Land, which is a positive compliment as well, because I think those are by far the best melodic death metal bands that ever came out. And if I'm not wrong, this was also released by Drakkar, but this one, the French version of it, not the South American. And killer riffs, man. One after the other, it's like a fucking avalanche. You listen to it, you end up feeling almost tired through all the emotions that this put you through, because it has a very epic approach to it. And for those that like melodies and riffs and aggression and raw passion for death metal, I would say Grenadier is probably one of the 5 best bands that came out in the last 5 to 10 years. So this was my top 7 of the year. My top 6. So the one that almost came within my top 5. which is also an album that I could have listened to more. And this is an album I've seen in plenty of lists from everyone that put out their best albums of the year. So I think this guy is really nailed. I need to read because the title of this album is something that so far I still cannot understand. Lacrimose Monuments of Obscuration by the Finnish Hooded Menace. So their previous album got a lot of hype already, but to be honest was subpar compared to this one. This one has the perfect mix of death metal with this melancholic approach that bands such as Paradise Lost and Catatonia used to have in the early 90s. So this is probably the best Peaceville Trio album put out in many years. This is a gatefold released also by Season of Mist, the same as the Gjøvik album. This is a purple vinyl. I don't know how to start, man. If you like doom metal, if you like death metal in a slow approach, if you like raw emotions, Hooded Menace is definitely the band for you to check out this year. I'm a big fan of Hooded Menace. I like pretty much every album that they put out, but what they did with this album here is above comparison to what they had before. It even has a cover version of Save a Prayer. Yes, that one that you're thinking about. And when I was listening to it, I was like, why are they doing this? But to be honest, when you listen to the whole album, it quite fits. And yeah, enough said. Listen to Hooded Menace. So, entering top 5. My fifth one is one I don't have a copy here, because it's not released yet. Although I already booked the pre-order, this is one of the best black metal albums that I've heard in many years. I know that there are more black metal within my top 5, but if you're looking for a more classic approach, although with a modern twist, I spoke about this band here before. If you haven't heard of them, I would suggest you to go back on my video about Brutal Assault in which I spoke about them. And I'm talking about the new record from Yellow Eyes, also an American band. Confusion Gate, newest album by Yellow Eyes. Well, their previous album was also not a metal album. I was a bit afraid of what to expect when they announced a new album, but when I listened to it, it was like, okay, this is what I wanted to listen from them. And they always give me this impression that they recorded the way they could, you know, like in a raw, maybe even cheap way, but not in a bad way by any means. You know, it's just like, okay, these are the resources we've got and let's do the best out of it. And so Yellow Eyes always gave me this impression of a very honest band that do it things from the heart with, and you can feel that they really feel passion for what they're doing. So Confusion Gate is it's an album I would like to talk more about, but since I haven't got my copy yet, because the vinyl is gonna be pressed and released only next year, and yeah, I would like to deep dive more within the lyrics and the entire concept of that, but I would suggest you to do the same and just check it out on their Bandcamp or and wait for the official release of that. So starting my top 5, I would say that Yellow Eyes calls quite a good impression, and maybe they would be higher if I should actually be in the ritual of listening to music the way I like to do it, which is putting side A, flipping side B, laying down, reading the lyrics, checking the insert, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I have a very nostalgic approach with metal, which is the way that I grew up liking it. So for me, having the original copies is always something worth it. And yeah, so let's move on. Top 4. I think this is a Danish band, if I am not wrong. Also only a tape release that I've got here. I'm talking about Cemetery 1 from Scimitar. So this is a band, if I'm not wrong, from the members of Slegt, which is also a band that I really enjoyed in the previous years, because they have such a cool heavy metal approach to their black metal way of doing music, or a black metal approach to their heavy metal way of doing music. This one here has clean female vocals, although it sounds very, very raw. If you listen to their demo, man, it's almost, I don't know, it's almost hard to hear. It's like when you listen to the first Carcass album. It has this dirt, it has this raw energy power in it, and I would say that this is an album that was, for quite a while, my favorite of the year, because this was probably the first album from the ones that I'm mentioning here that came out this year, and so probably the one I listened to the most until now. And Scimitar is a great band. If you haven't heard of them, if you like heavy metal, if you like black metal, go and listen to them. This is music done with their heart, and you can feel it when you listen to it. So, reaching to my top 3 now. So, I would say that from the top 3, any album could be in any position here, because they're all great. And, well, maybe the first one is slightly above the others, but if I'm not wrong, this is a Canadian band, or maybe American, I'm not sure. Following my intuition, I would say Canadian. Although this is a tribute to Greek black metal. This album is La Grande Hérésie, from a band that I cannot pronounce the name properly. Zycrideus, Zycrideus, whatever. Call it the way you want to call it. Maybe it's even Greek and I have no idea. I don't speak Greek. The same way as I don't speak Nordic languages. I've spoke a lot about this guy in my previous videos, because he's been every single year releasing one of my favorite albums, not with this band but with his other bands, and being Warm probably my favorite one. This is a very bass driven band, so when you expect to have some solos, don't expect a guitar solo but rather a bass solo. So these are for fans of old Rotten Christ, old Verathron, old Zemial, all of these Greek classic metal bands, but with a Guitar Hero twist, but in this case rather than guitar, bass. And I've always said like, oh, Warm is black doom death metal for Guitar Heroes fans, and I think that Zycrideus, he takes the same approach, but he applies that to the bass. So you have this very heavy, very powerful low tones when you listen to it, which is not usually something that you hear on black metal, which is a more mid to higher notes, tones. as usual, but I think this is what makes this band so unique, you know? It sounds like the Greek, it has a twist, and yeah, this is a band I would love to see live. I don't know if he ever played live, if he's actually doing anything live. And yeah, great band. And this is a must-have. Moving forward, top 2. So this one is an album that was definitely a grower. The first time I listened to it, it was not my favorite of the year. Or it was among my favorites, but this album took me like 10 listens to reach up to top 2. And to be honest, it only fell down to the top 2 because the top 1 was released very late this year. So I thought that for a very long time that this would be my favorite album. I'm talking about the Italian doom metal band Messa, and this album is The Spin. Female fronted band, classic doom metal approach, slow songs, epic songs, very dense, very sentimental. Some parts here are extreme that I would say that would go even up to a black metal feeling to it. This was released by the classic Metal Blade label and Metal Blade Records. And I think this is an album in which every song is so touching in a way that wouldn't make you forget what they did for a very long time. So yeah, I would say that the opening track, Void Meridian, is one of the best tracks of the year, especially the way that it follows up with the second song at Races. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm suspect to say I'm a big doom metal fan, and I think that this is one of the best doom metal releases in the last 10 years. And I really enjoyed the previous album by Messa, but I think they went way above with this release. So yeah, if you have the chance, give it a spin to The Spin. And okay, before I go to my top 1 album of the year, I would like to say that although I mentioned that this was not a good year in terms of very new releases, all of the ones I'm talking here are great, so don't put them into accountability. And probably my top 1 here would be even my top 2 of last year, which is a year that I consider to be a better year in terms of releases. But I need to say that in terms of represses and in terms of bringing stuff to walks that was never pressed before, this year was a great year. I've bought so many deluxe editions, anniversary editions, and there are plenty of records that were not released in a decent way in such a long time. I would say, I mentioned about Scimitar, that it has like this feeling when you listen to the first Carcass albums, Symphonies of Sickness and Reek of Putrefaction. Finally, Earache put out them with the original covers, for example. Cryogenic Caliphase was finally released in vinyl, plus many other represses and re-releases that I'm very thankful for. Death's Symbolic was finally repressed because they were repressing all the previous albums except for Symbolic for such a long time. Anyways, in that sense, this was a good year, so don't get me wrong when I say that this was a subpar year in comparison to the previous ones. In terms of represses and re-releases, this was probably the best so far. And now, my top 1 of the year. French band, classic band. Ever since their first album, They are pushing the boundaries of what black metal is and how we should face black metal. And plenty of times they reached right at the spot. And I'd say that a few years ago they released an album called Hallucinogen, which is one of their best up to date. And after that they were releasing a series that was good, but not as much. But right now they came back in style to this more psychedelic approach, this more dreamlike, space-like, and I'm talking about Ethereal Horizons by Blut aus Nord. Blut aus Nord, as I said, is probably one of the major black metal bands ever since they started in the mid-90s, because they never conformed within the boundaries of the genre. So some would call them more an avant-garde metal band rather than a black metal band per se. And I think that's what brings the magic in this band. And I cannot even think of something that is as close to it musically. I think that this is from a different level. Blut aus Nord, Oranssi Pazuzu from Finland also does something very different with their approach. And yeah, this album came out only last month, end of last month actually, so end of November. And I almost forgot it was gonna be released. And it was like previous years, if I'm not wrong, not sure if Drudk or Hate Forest put an album late December, or a few years ago I also didn't mention the new Mr. Ming album that was also released in December. So that's always a problem on putting out these videos in the middle of December, because there are some bands that release something so late, and Blut aus Nord almost skipped my radar. But of course, it's a band that is so important to me that I always gonna check them up. And I was not expecting it to be that good. This is not only the best metal album of the year, this is one of the best metal albums of the decade. And the side B has such a beautiful cover art printed in it. It has like vinyl, this marble effect, which I find quite beautiful as well. So, for now, for this year, that was it. I know that I suck on being active on my channel because I'm so lazy to keep on recording videos and doing stuff like that. Next year I'll be going to Brutal Assault again, so I might do another Brutal Assault recap. And I don't know where Outlaw is going to be playing, but yeah, I'm not even sure if I will be able to play every gig because of family duties and working duties and stuff like that. But I hope to see you some in the road, and looking forward to a hopefully better year in 2026. And yeah, stay tuned. And if you came up to here, if you're interested in what I'm saying, I hate doing that kind of stuff because I'm not a YouTuber, I'm not a like digger or anything like that. But if you enjoyed anything that I had to say here, make sure that this content reach out other people, so consider giving a like, consider subscribing, and please put in the comments your favorite albums of the year. Thank you so much, and see you again in 2026. Cheers.